Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to finally review Dynasty Warriors 9. I know I'm super late with this one, but, I do have 11 different Let's Plays going on, so the cycle of being able to finish a game has definitely been a lot difficult, and in fact, I didn't even finish Dynasty Warriors 9. However, the game was so bland and boring that I just sort of decided to drop it and review it as is. As of now, I feel like I have all the information I need to review this video game to its best, which isn't a good sign for any video game. And so anyways, as per usual for these video game reviews, I'm going to break this down to two sections. The first will cover the story, the second will cover gameplay. So, what is the story of Dynasty Warriors 9? Well, it is the same exact story of the previous Dynasty Warriors games, with the exception of the original Dynasty Warriors, which, interestingly enough, a fun fact, it was actually a fighting game. A versus fighting game, to be exact. And the transition was made over to the more hack-and-slash attack system in Dynasty Warriors 2 moving forward. However, I do feel like the big movement of Dynasty Warriors kicked off primarily in Dynasty Warriors 3. When I look at a Facebook group I'm associated with and look around boards around Dynasty Warriors, people asking what game they started in, most people generally tend to say that they got into this franchise during Dynasty Warriors 3 or 4 at the very most. With that being said, I'm very much on the same boat. I've joined in on this franchise at Dynasty Warriors 3 and have played each sequential number since. I have not played Dynasty Warriors 2, and I have definitely not played Dynasty Warriors 1. With that being said, I usually enjoy a hack-and-slash video game. They're pretty fun, pretty relaxing, and overall I've also been enjoying Warriors Orochi 4, which I'll leave a link to the first part in the link of the description, as well as the first part to Dynasty Warriors 9 in the links in the description below. Now that I get the little pretense out of the way, let me get into my review of Dynasty Warriors 9. Let's begin with the story, again, as I mentioned before. So, to make this crystal clear to anyone that may be on the outside of this whole franchise, Dynasty Warriors 9, and most of the others, primarily and loosely are based off of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms books, which is also loosely based off of a war in ancient China between three factions, Wu, Shu, and Wei. Within these, of course, there were other factions warring to control the state of China. However, Wu, Shu, and Wei took prominence at one point, and this is usually the point in where most of the game's stories take place within the warring factions between Wu, Shu, and Wei. However, later games in the franchise, I believe from either 7 or 8 moving forward, they introduced the winning faction. I suppose spoiler alert for who won an ancient war, but the winners ended up being the Jin Dynasty, at least within the time frame of this game, as well as the novel. So, interestingly enough, this is a very pseudo-historical video game, and I've always enjoyed pseudo-history myself. It's always made history a little bit more interesting, a little bit more enjoyable to digest, if you will, which is always why I always had a fascination with Dynasty Warriors to begin with. It is what primarily got me fascinated with this ancient war in China, what the deal was. In fact, I looked at a little bit, I got a little glimpse into a book called The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu, an ancient philosopher of Chinese warrior tactics. And seeing the game move and progress from 3 to 4 to 5 and so on and so forth was pretty interesting. What battles they would cover, with new warriors they would reveal and allow us to play as, and the ever-expansive ability to hack and slash through an entire battlefield, and this very 1 versus 1,000 mentality. And that mentality grew with each number within the franchise. Now, if you were to ask me what my favorite Dynasty Warriors game is, I'd probably have a struggle, but I think I would probably be more lenient toward 5 in terms of story, but in terms of gameplay, I'd probably go with 8, or the expansions of 8. But I'll get into those reasons in my gameplay section. So, primarily focusing on the story of Dynasty Warriors 9, we once again rejoin these factions, and the way that the story is split up is a bit bizarre, to say the very least, and this is where the problems already start to mount for Dynasty Warriors 9. You see, in previous games, such as Dynasty Warriors 5, while you were sort of grouped within the 3 factions, whenever you picked a warrior, for example, let's say you picked Liu Bei from Shu, you would follow 5 stages, and you would follow Liu Bei in 5 stages where he was a significant warrior. This gave Dynasty Warriors 5, to me, it's the best story because it not only followed the factions, but more specifically, it followed the warriors and gave them their own unique battles and takes on each battle. That's why, to me, Dynasty Warriors 5 is the best story, hands down, and is yet to be overbeaten by any of the other Dynasty Warriors stories afterwards. So, with that being said, apologize for any lag or awkward pauses. I do appreciate if you would check out the links in the description, possibly below, when sending you over to my my Patreon page. What I will be doing with that is setting up a donations will be guided toward getting a separate laptop so I can separate my recording from other programs, so I can prevent potential lag like that has been going on in my past few videos. I do deeply apologize. I do want to try to get better at quality videos, but it's been getting harder and harder for me with this this current lag problem that I've been having while recording. Anyways, getting back to the story. The problem with Dynasty Warriors 9 is that it tries to combine this sort of warrior-to-warrior unique story with the story of the entire faction. So what do I mean by that? For example, let's take once again Liu Bei from Shu, which is the first character I decided to play as in Dynasty Warriors, so I think that would be the best example to use here. So once you begin Liu Bei's story, you start off from the beginning, from the war, and you actually pretty much follow almost all the way to the end, because it so happens that Liu Bei actually happened to live for a very long time, according to the historical stuff, or semi-historical stuff, I should say. However, the problem is, if you were to choose another warrior from Shu, they might start at another point of the timeline. However, because they are within that same faction, they will always follow the same exact quest until they reach their ending point, which will be unique to them, but every other quest will always be the same, which isn't what was apparent in Dynasty Warriors 5. In Dynasty Warriors 5, each battle felt unique in that way, whereas in Dynasty Warriors 9, you followed the same exact quest over and over with each and every warrior. I've tested this out. I can confirm that this is how it is set up. It is set up chapter by chapter within the factions, and the characters only last for, again, however they last. So that could be even 1 chapter, or it can expand to 2, or in the case of Liu Bei, nearly 10 to 12 chapters within this timeline story. So, there's that problem. It seems to try to do both of these things, and I don't think that's a very successful way of doing this. I much prefer the way of Dynasty Warriors 5, giving each warrior their own unique battles, and their own unique perspective on top of that. But, nonetheless, that isn't to say that Dynasty Warriors 9 doesn't have at least one good thing, which, again, I will always at least be fair in my video game reviews. As much as I dislike this game, as much as I do find that this game has a lot not good with it, I could at least say the cutscenes are good. That being the non-in-game cutscenes. There definitely seem to be at least one or two cutscenes that seem to happened either like really, really early on, or like near the end of its development, and felt very separate from everything else in Dynasty Warriors 9. One thing I can praise the cutscenes for is that, at least when I was playing the game in English, which again a lot of even fans would not recommend, but that's the way I decided to play it anyway, the mouth movements of the characters, they looked like they actually kind of fit what the characters were saying, which is a really cool thing, considering the transition from Japanese to English to the actual introduced language in this, which is Chinese, which is very interesting considering. So, again, I give praise for that, but that is probably where a lot of my praise stops, unfortunately. The other cutscenes, the in-game cutscenes, are long, drag out, and considerably take up a lot of load screens to get from one to the other. And load screens happen because one other additional warrior may walk into the scene, or perhaps they walk into a different area, so they have to load into their new scene, and so on and so forth. It gets pretty bad. It gets to the point of boredom, quite frankly, and if I would have kept going and listening to every single cutscene and walk to every single area within the open world, this Let's Play would have gone on for far too long. And my game time to this game would have also gone on for far too long. The boredom just would have gotten to me so badly just to go from one place to the other and not experience just anything interesting, but I am getting kind of caught up into gameplay at this point. So, I'll get to that in a moment and talk more in depth about the lackluster open world. So, the narration is a welcomed return in English, but again, this is between chapters I'm referring to. They do their job, I also feel. They get to the point pretty clearly. And again, I feel like that and the out of cutscene material are the only two positives I can give Dynasty Warriors 9. Everything else is a big oof. And that to me is the biggest disappointment of Dynasty Warriors 9. I want to make it crystal clear that this game was supposed to be what Koei Tecmo, Koei Tecmo, I was about to say something else, but anyway, Koei Tecmo's 20th anniversary video game. This was supposed to be their 20th anniversary video game, and it ended up being a major flop. Talk about just missing the mark. Talk about doing some disgusting practices, which I'll get into after the gameplay segment. But in terms of story, I would give the score a 4 out of 10. I do feel like the narration and the out of cutscene material for when it does appear are the only things that even make it that high at all. If those weren't present, this game wouldn't even get a story out of 4 out of 10. This would easily be a 0 out of 10 story if they did not have those cutscenes and that narration to cover the game. So that is my score for the story of Dynasty Warriors 9. Now let's talk about that gameplay. So, even before this game even came out, the issues of this gameplay was becoming immediate when I started following the news of Dynasty Warriors 9. The first crystal clear issue is something we of the fans, or former fans in some cases I suppose, also say, the term cloning. Now what is cloning? Well, that is when one warrior player shares an exact moveset from another player. Now, some have argued that even Dynasty Warriors 3, 4, and 5 are also, as well as 2, but I wouldn't know for sure, but I'll just throw it in there just in case. Those were also apparently guilty of cloning warriors, that being a warrior, such as Liu Bei, would be the exact same moveset as Cao Cao, or as he was known before the translation fix, Cao Cao. Their movesets were both one single-handed sword, and they would attack the same exact way, meaning that they would be considered to many as cloned warriors. However, I would argue that the charge attacks, the triangle button, in the PlayStation version anyway, is what would distinguish Liu Bei from Cao Cao, from Sun Jian, who also used a single sword, to a few other warriors who also shared this single sword moveset. Their charge attacks and musels or special attacks, for those not in the fan base, were distinguishable enough from each other to not make it 100% cloned. Their movesets weren't 100% the same. I would say about 40% of their moveset were the same, while the rest is unique enough to distinguish warrior from warrior. Not to mention that they all also had their own personalities to suit back then. So, this cloning issue first appeared more distinguishably in Dynasty Warriors 6, for those of you who don't know. This is, of course, where a lot of people felt that Dynasty Warriors started to go downwards in terms of quality. But there is going to be a big however coming up. But for the time being, I'll stick with the cloning and say that yes, Dynasty Warriors 6 was guilty of deep cloning a lot of the warriors, and then making later DLC, and then giving those weapons back to the warriors for an additional price, which definitely felt scummy even at the time. I don't remember the pricing for the weapons. I think they might have been cheaper, so they might have been a little bit. I would have been a little bit more lenient in terms of that, but I can't confirm the pricing. I don't have that knowledge on me, unfortunately. But that is to say that there was some guilty DLCing of previously established weapons to warriors that were now taken away and added back as DLC, which to me is never a good thing. And there are other games that are guilty of it, and I'll get to that too. So, with that being said, Dynasty Warriors 6 was definitely lambasted, probably primarily for this. There were some who also argued about Dynasty Warriors 6's combat in terms of its style, which I forget what the actual term that they used for the gameplay, but for simplicity's sake I will say it was more akin to an infinite combo system, which made the combat much more easier and accessible, but that kind of took away from some of the game's more challenging aspects. I'll put that in quotes. But again, there is a big however coming from Dynasty Warriors 6 all the way to Dynasty Warriors 9. Now, if anyone's curious how they rectify this in Dynasty Warriors 7, it was a little bit baffling to say the very least. Now, they gave every character the ability to use every weapon in Dynasty Warriors 7. However, they gave each character, when they equipped their main weapon, quote-unquote, a EX move, or an additional move. This means that while every warrior could technically be considered 100% cloned from one to another, when they equipped their own weapon, they had that one move that made them unique from everyone else. And Dynasty Warriors 8 only added an additional extra move, but kept the whole everyone could equip every weapon sort of motif, which kind of was very baffling, to say the very least. Now, I was always of the preference, when playing both Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8, to always maintain that every warrior would equip their weapon. To me, that just made the most sense, and to me that made the experience of both 7 and 8 a lot more enjoyable, to have every warrior stay unique rather than be cloned. But Dynasty Warriors baffling makes things even worse than that. Instead of just doing that and keeping it unique that way, Dynasty Warriors 9 also maintains that everyone can equip every weapon. However, unlike 7 and 8, instead of the warrior having the EX move, the EX is now applied to the weapon, which means now that every warrior can do every EX move, which makes it now that 0% of Dynasty Warriors 9 characters are unique. That's right. It went from every character to at least having some uniqueness to being 0 characters are unique. And that's a bigger issue for me than even Dynasty Warriors 6 alone. But it actually gets even worse than Dynasty Warriors 6, believe it or not, and we'll get there. So, this is just covering the weapons. We haven't even covered the open world. Now, I said this at the last part of the open world, and I will repeat it here if you did not see that part of Dynasty Warriors, or my Let's Play of Dynasty Warriors. I said that the open world was very uneventful. There was no reason to explore this open world. And that just felt the most frustrating, considering that there were so many possibilities to this open world aspect. In fact, when they announced open world, unlike, say, a Jim Sterling who said that Koei Tecmo was guilty of joining the trend, I never took that as Dynasty or Koei Tecmo doing a bad thing. I don't think that that was a fair critique on Koei Tecmo. Following the trend isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I'm gonna say a big old fuck you to Jim Sterling on that one. And yes, I know I flubbed that almost, but I'm keeping it in. So you can mock me and say I fucked up too, but hey, that is not a fair criticism to say that they joined a bandwagon. That's not a bad thing. How they executed it was bad, yes, but them doing it on its own principle is not a bad thing. But let's talk more about its execution. Sorry for the cut in the review. Back where I was saying, I was about to talk about the execution of the open world and how I thought the execution of this was bad. So, at the finale of my Let's Play of Dynasty Warriors 9, I mentioned how and I compared this to another open world game, and I'll redo that here because just in case you did not see the finale. So, I compared this open world to another open world game, which I think is fair, Marvel's Spider-Man. So, in Spider-Man, throughout its open sandbox or open world, whatever you want to call it, there are various side quests you can take on, and yes, in Dynasty Warriors 9 there are side quests in each town. However, the reward is what is the main drive of what I'm going to be talking about here. You see, the only reward you seem to get in Dynasty Warriors 9 for doing, quote, side quests, and I'm putting that in quotes on purpose, is experience, which you can just get by doing main quest anyway, and they make you just do some things that are equivalent to doing side quest in the main quest anyways, making the side quest completely irrelevant. By comparison, in Marvel's Spider-Man, you have a system in which when you do a side quest, you get these little tokens, and you can give these tokens up to get rewards, such as the various costumes of the various different Spider-Man costumes. And that's exactly what they could have done for Dynasty Warriors 9, is that sprawled throughout the open world, there are the same exact side quest, however, the extra added incentive to doing said side quest are the alternate costumes from previous Dynasty Warriors games moving forward. And not make it DLC, which is something they did anyway, is that they added DLC in terms of weapons and decloning certain warriors. So, that made the open world completely pointless. But let's move on to something that I feel is even more frustrating than its open world, the combat. In combat, Dynasty Warriors has always been a hack and slash, and technically, yes, this is no different in that regard. And some people have complained in Dynasty Warriors 6 is that the infinite combo system was kind of boring by comparison to the previous installments of swinging the button over and over again and then doing the charges of triangle to, or because I'm talking the PlayStation 4 version, pressing the triangle button to do the charges. So, in the case of Dynasty Warriors 9, you could do your normal attack, you could do your charge attack, and you could hold R1 to do like the shortcut charge attack, in which the jumping charge attack is so overpowered that it might as well be the equivalent to the Infinity system in Dynasty Warrior 6. You can just spam it over and over again and get the best results, or the quickest results. However, unlike Dynasty Warriors 6, even the combat of Dynasty Warriors 9 feels worse. Yes, I'm gonna say it, Dynasty Warriors Dynasty Warriors 9 combat is so much worse. You see, when the triangle prompt appears for you to do a KO move, and sometimes when I was pressing it, sometimes my warrior would charge in a different direction from where I was facing to face various peons and take them out instead. And that's not good combat. That's got good control. At least I can say for Dynasty Warriors 6, I always felt like I was in control. Here in Dynasty Warriors 9, I can't even say that. I can't even say I ever felt like I was in full control of my character, because sometimes he or she would just go charging in a different direction, and I'd be like, what the fuck? I'm not trying to hit this guy, I'm trying to hit this officer over here that I've been facing the entire time. But no, for some forsaken reason, I'm just going in a different direction from where I was trying to face anyway. So yes, the combat is broken, and even after all of its updates, in terms of this review, have not been fixed. It still does this, and the game is still broken in terms of the feel of hack and slash. I don't mind the shortcut itself, but I think that it does sort of actually limit the possibilities of the different charge attacks. So, hopefully, the amount of rants that previous people have done for Dynasty Warriors 9 will be a wake-up call if they ever do decide to do a Dynasty Warriors 10, which is probably gonna end up happening anyways, but nonetheless, I'm also gonna argue that Warriors Orochi 4 feels like more of a send-up to the classic Koei Tecmo fans have come to know and appreciate. That game feels like a more complete, cohesive, and even better feeling game overall. It is a landslide how much better Warriors Orochi 4 is currently, and by the way, I do intend to actually finish that game because it actually feels good to play by comparison. So it is an absolute shame that Dynasty Warriors 9's combat absolutely falls flat. The story is flat, it's boring, it's long, you feel like you have to long travel or quick travel all over the place only to find out that there are still various load screens. The combat is broken, it doesn't feel good. The open world is so limited in what it offers, even after all of its updates. I don't feel like the whole tiger hunting thing that they added isn't enough quality of life to keep someone like me around. It doesn't offer enough in terms of what the open world in comparison to other games, as I mentioned in Marvel's Spider-Man. There's not enough reward. Yeah, you can keep adding quests, but if you offer no reward, it's not worth it to me. You should have offered players the previous costumes at the very most. But you didn't even do that. So let's talk about DLC, shall we? So, as I mentioned pretty briefly before, by the way, I'm going to give my score on the gameplay before I do this. The score for the gameplay is it's a 0. It's like a 0 or 1 out of 10. It is not good. It is broken. It does not feel good, and it's just boring. It does not work. It doesn't feel good either to know that I don't have full control over my warrior. So let's talk about DLC now, because this is a game that offers DLC, and here's the thing about me and DLC. Everyone has different takes on DLC, I feel, and this is my take, is that it's not necessarily evil if done right. I always felt like DLC should offer a lot. If you're going to offer it, you should give your people a lot to do. You should offer new levels, new weapons, new content, new warriors, perhaps. A lot. You should give so much offering if you're going to do DLC. And my preference is that you should usually try to bundle it more so than not. To make a comparison to Fallout 4, which is, it had the 4 DLCs, or 5, I forgot how many there were, but for each of them they would add a whole new area, new weapons, new content, new quests, etc., etc., new monsters to face. That's a lot. So I felt when they made that whole collector's edition, the Game of the Year edition, or whatever you want to call it, with the DLC included, that felt like a really good deal to get, so that's why I got it at the time. But for in the case of Dynasty Warriors 9, that is not the case. They offered some side quests to some warriors. However, again, with the whole long cutscenes and the bad gameplay, I just felt like that wouldn't have been worth the price of admission of these DLCs. Especially the weapons. These weapons have, of course, been previously established to be those warriors' weapons, and the fact that they were taken out in the first place is kind of a spit in the face, I feel. And yes, I'll make another comparison, just to be fair, to Tekken 7. From Tekken 6 to Tekken 7, yes, they did reintroduce fighters from a previous game. Now, yes, that did feel a little bit scummy, but to me, it's actually far less scummy than even Dynasty Warriors 9. And one of the key components to Tekken 7 by comparison is that Tekken 7 feels good to play. It actually feels good to play. The combat feels good. It feels, when I press a button, it does what I want it to do, etc., etc. And to be fair, they did also do the whole Negan thing. And each warrior, each fighter, I should say, does have various costumes, their own unique costumes, and that just comes with their stuff anyway. Including their own little stages if they didn't have them before. So I felt like Tekken 7 by comparison already offered more content. Even though they were bringing back most of the same fighters and then one additional fighter from something else. So that's my feeling on it. They also did the other fighters like Noctis and Geese Howard and so on and so forth. Those are fine if those wanted to be DLCs, because those are from different companies, etc., etc. That stuff is way more complicated. That stuff makes sense to me in terms of DLC, and even the pricing I felt is a lot more fair on those for what you get. But again, by comparison, Dynasty Warriors 9 does not feel like that. They should have added not just the stages. The weapons should have already been there, but for the sake of argument, let's say that they should have been a lot cheaper, because they should have been I feel like they should have been bundled up cheaper, and they should have been way more weapons for each pack, if you will, because there are so many warriors in this game that are cloned from each other. So many. It's embarrassing how many warriors are cloned. And again, I go back to the weapons are the things that have the EX thing attached to them, not the unique warriors, which again makes the whole point of those weapons kind of mute anyways, because you could just give them to anybody. Fuck it, right? At least in Tekken 7, each fighter feels unique from each other. Even from the ones from previous installments, each fighter still feels unique. By comparison, Dynasty Warriors fighters don't feel unique. Why would I get something if it doesn't feel unique? What's the point? So I already gave the gameplay a 1 out of 10. The DLC is a 0 out of 10. I did not get that DLC, and I never do plan to get it. It is not worth it. It is not worth the price. It is not worth what you are seeing. None of the new warriors, none of them. It doesn't matter, because they're gonna play the exact same way as every other warrior. What's the point? What is the actual point? There's no point. There is 0 point to getting that DLC. So that is my rant review of Dynasty Warriors 9. If you enjoyed it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.